I never thought I'd be scared of a car wash. It's one of those mundane things you do on a Saturday afternoon, right? Grab some snacks, put on some music, vacuum the crumbs out of the seats. But the one on the edge of Fremont, Nebraska, just off Highway 30, where the town sort of peters out into cornfields, that place got under my skin in a way I still can't shake. It was late October, and the air had that crisp, dry smell of fallen leaves and cold earth. I'd been dating Vanessa for about 3 months. Vanessa? God, even now, thinking about her ties my stomach in knots. She had this way of moving that was just hypnotic. She wasn't tall, maybe 5'4", but she carried herself like she owned every room she walked into. That day she was wearing these tight, faded jeans that hugged her hips and thighs perfectly, and a thin cream-colored sweater that did nothing to hide the curve of her breasts. Every time she shifted in the passenger seat, the sweater rode up just enough to show a sliver of tan skin. Above her waistband I kept stealing glances, my mind drifting where it shouldn't have, especially given how on edge I was already feeling. We were in my beat-up Ford Ranger, the one with the passenger side window that only went down halfway. The plan was simple: get the truck cleaned, maybe grab an early dinner at the diner in town, then head back to my place. Normal couple stuff. Vanessa had insisted on coming along. She said she liked the way I focused on things, the little frown I got when I was concentrating on driving. I think she just liked having an excuse to get out of her apartment. "This place is kind of creepy, don't you think?" she said as I pulled off the highway onto the gravel lot. The Fremont Auto Wash stood alone, a long, low-slung building of corrugated metal painted a faded, peeling blue. It looked like it had been there since the 70s and had given up trying to keep up appearances. On one side was an empty field, stalks of dead corn rattling in the wind. On the other, a closed-down feed store with boards over the windows. The automatic bay doors were open, revealing a dark, tunnel-like interior. A flickering fluorescent light buzzed over the payment kiosk. "It's cheap," I said, shrugging, "and it's the only one for 20 miles that does an undercarriage rinse. With all the salt they put on the roads already, I don't want the frame rusting out." "Practical," she said, with a smile that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. She leaned over to fiddle with the radio, and the movement made her sweater stretch tight across her back. I could see the outline of her bra strapped through the fabric. My throat went dry. I forced my eyes back to the windshield. I pulled up to the kiosk, fed a $10 bill into the slot, and selected the deluxe shine package. The machine whirred, spat out a token, and the green light above the entrance bay lit up. As I drove slowly into the dark tunnel, the outside world vanished, replaced by the close, damp smell of soap and wet concrete. The first part was normal. The red light clicked on, telling us to stop. The machinery groaned to life, and thick, soapy foam began to cascade over the windshield, blotting out the view. Giant cloth strips, like the arms of some lethargic monster, started to sway and beat against the sides of the truck. The noise was a rhythmic, pounding thrum. Vanessa giggled, a nervous, breathy sound. "It feels like we're being eaten." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, not my favorite feeling." I put the truck in neutral and let the conveyor system pull us forward. We were completely encased in suds now. The world was a blur of white and blue. Vanessa reached out and put her hand on my thigh. Her fingers were warm, even through the denim of my jeans. My heart did a stupid little jump. I covered her hand with mine, my thumb stroking the smooth skin on the back of her wrist. For a minute, it was just us in this warm, noisy private cave. Then the soap cycle ended, and the high-pressure rinse began. Jets of water hammered the truck, sluicing the suds away in rivers. The light inside the tunnel was a dim, aqueous green from the cleaning solution still swirling in the water. As we moved slowly forward, the view cleared. And that's when I saw him. There was a man standing inside the car wash. He was just there, between the spinning rinse arches, standing on the wet concrete floor as if it was the most natural place in the world to be. He was tall and painfully thin, wearing a dark, soaked-through windbreaker and jeans. His hair was plastered to his skull by the spray. He wasn't moving. He was just staring into the truck. Right at us. My grip on Vanessa's hand tightened. "What the hell?" I muttered. "What?" she asked, following my gaze. She gasped, her fingers digging into my leg. "Oh my God, is he an attendant?" "There are no attendants in an automatic wash," I said, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. You're not supposed to be in here when it's running. It's dangerous. The man didn't react. The water sheeted off the arches and pounded the roof, but he stood perfectly still, his arms hanging limp at his sides, his face was pale and gaunt, his eyes dark sockets that he looked like he'd been standing in the rain for a week. As we were dragged past him by the conveyor, his head turned slowly, smoothly, keeping his gaze locked on mine. It wasn't a natural movement. It was like a camera panning on a tripod. Then we were past him, moving into the final rinse cycle. The spotless water jets came on, beating on the windshield. That was so weird, Vanessa said, letting out a shaky laugh. She squeezed my thigh again, but this time it felt more for her own comfort. Maybe he's maintenance? Checking a nozzle or something? Maybe, I said, but I didn't believe it. His clothes were street clothes, not a uniform, and his expression? He hadn't had one. It was just blank, empty. A cold knot was forming in my stomach. The final rinse should have lasted a minute, maybe 90 seconds. The water should have shut off, the dryer blower should have kicked in, and the green exit light at the end of the tunnel should have lit up. It didn't. The rinse kept going, the jets of water continued to beat down on the truck. A minute passed. Then two. Is it supposed to last this long? Vanessa asked, her voice was smaller now. No, I said. I peered through the water-blurred windshield. The exit was only 20 feet away, a rectangle of gray Nebraska sky, but we weren't moving. The conveyor had stopped. We were just sitting there, trapped in a relentless, pounding waterfall. The noise was starting to get inside my head, a constant, deafening roar. Try the radio, I said. Vanessa turned the knob. Instead of music, there was nothing but a low, guttural static, a sound like wet stones grinding together. She flicked it off quickly, her hand trembling. That's when I saw him again. Through the driver's side window, distorted by the torrent of water, the thin man was walking slowly alongside the truck. His hands were in his pockets now. He leaned down, bringing his face close to the glass. His features were blurred by the water, but I could see the pale oval of his face, the dark pits of his eyes. He wasn't blinking. Water streamed down the window between us. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked up. It was the sheer wrongness of it, the utter violation of the space. This was my truck. This was our little bubble, and he was just there. Vanessa saw him a second later. She let out a sharp, choked sound and recoiled against her seat, pulling her knees up to her chest. The movement hiked up her jeans, exposing her ankles and the delicate bones there. I had a bizarre, intrusive thought about how small and vulnerable they looked. The man outside didn't move. He just watched us. The rinse cycle continued to hammer down. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only another 30 seconds, the conveyor gave a sudden lurch and we started moving again. The man outside straightened up and took a step back, disappearing from view as we were pulled forward. The rinse jets cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow louder and more terrifying than the noise had been. My ears were ringing. The dryers didn't turn on. We emerged into the weak afternoon light. The truck was dripping, covered in beads of water. I didn't wait for the dryers. I shoved the gearshift into drive and hit the gas, spraying gravel as I peeled out of the exit bay and onto the road. What the fuck was that? Vanessa breathed, her voice trembling. She was hugging herself, her knuckles white. Her sweater was damp from the condensation inside the cab, clinging to her breasts. I couldn't stop looking at the way the fabric was plastered to her skin, the outline of her nipples visible through the wet wool. The mix of fear and a raw, inappropriate arousal made me feel sick. I don't know, I said, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my fingers ached. A glitch. A weirdo. I don't know. I drove too fast back into town, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. The road behind us was empty. We didn't talk much over dinner at the diner. We just picked at our food. Every time the bell over the door jingled, we both flinched. Vanessa kept rubbing her arms like she was cold. He was just so still, she said quietly, staring at her plate of uneaten fries. Did you see his eyes? It was like there was nobody home. I nodded. I had seen. I took her back to her apartment. We usually ended up there on weekends. Her place was nicer than mine. That night, though, the familiar space felt different. The shadows in the hallway seemed deeper. Every creak of the old building made my heart stutter. We went through the motions. We watched some TV, but I couldn't tell you what was on. My mind was back in that blue tunnel, with the water pounding and that pale face at the window, of Vanessa changed into a loose tank top and a pair of tiny sleep shorts that I watched the muscles in her bare calves flex as she walked from the bathroom to the kitchen to get a glass of water. The fear was still a cold stone in my gut, but seeing the smooth skin of her thighs, the way the shorts hugged the perfect curve of her ass sent a flush of heat through me that felt shameful and urgent. When we went to bed, I pulled her to me more roughly than I usually would. She responded, her kisses hungry, almost desperate. It was like we were both trying to burn the memory out of our heads with physical sensation. I was hyper-aware of every part of her. The feel of her hips under my hands, the sound of her breathing, the way her back arched. It was intense, almost frantic, and when it was over, we lay in the dark, not speaking, just listening to each other's heartbeats slow down. I thought that would be the end of it. A bizarre, creepy story to tell friends someday. *K, remember that time we got stuck in the car wash? But it wasn't the end. The next Saturday I had to go back. It was stupid, I know. But my truck was already dirty again from a week of commuting, and a part of me, a stubborn, male part that didn't want to be scared off by some freak, insisted on going back to the Fremont Auto Washington. I told myself it was about the undercarriage rinse. I told myself he was just some homeless guy who'd wandered in, that it was a one-time thing. Vanessa refused to come with me. She said her car needed cleaning too, but she'd used the spray bays in town. I didn't blame her. I went alone in the late afternoon. The place looked exactly the same. The same flickering light, the same dead cornfields, the same hollow feeling in my chest as I pulled in. I paid my $10. The token clunked out. I drove into the tunnel. The soap cycle was fine. The rinse was fine. My shoulders began to unclench. See? I told myself it was nothing. A fluke. Then the final rinse started, and it didn't stop. Again. The same relentless pounding of water. The conveyor ground to a halt. I was trapped in the same spot, the exit so close yet impossibly far. Panic, cold and sharp, started to prickle at the back of my neck. I stared straight ahead, refusing to look to the sides. I didn't want to see him. I didn't. My phone was on the passenger seat. I grabbed it. Service. Of course I was in a metal box surrounded by water jets. The screen flickered, and for a second, instead of my wallpaper, a picture of Vanessa laughing on a hike, it showed a distorted, watery image of a gaunt face. I dropped the phone like it was hot. And then I heard it. A tap. A single, deliberate tap on the driver's side window. I flinched, my whole body jerking. Slowly, against every screaming instinct in my body, I turned my head. He was there, the same man. His clothes were dry this time. His windbreaker was zipped up to his throat. He leaned close to the glass, his head cocked to one side. This time he wasn't expressionless. He was smiling. It was a small, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. He lifted a hand and pointed, not at me, past me. The empty passenger seat. Then he held up 2 fingers. The conveyor jerked into motion. The rinse cut off. I stomped on the gas before the truck was even fully out of the bay, roaring out of there like a bat out of hell. I didn't look back. I didn't tell Vanessa about the second time. I didn't want to scare her more. But things started to get weird. A few days later, I found a puddle of water on the driver's side floor mat of my truck. It hadn't rained. The window was rolled up tight. I sopped it up with a rag, trying to ignore the cold feeling in my gut. Then the photo started showing up on my phone.